At an elite car dealership, a successful black businesswoman faces humiliation and discrimination while trying to purchase a luxury vehicle. But when her son steps in, the arrogant dealer realizes he's made the biggest mistake of his career. The shocking twist that follows will change everything. If you enjoy stories about justice prevailing and dignity triumphing over prejudice, hit the subscribe button and tell us, which city are you watching from? The gleaming showroom of Prestige Motors sparkled under the afternoon sun, its floor-to-ceiling windows displaying rows of pristine luxury vehicles that caught every ray of light. Among them stood a metallic silver Aston Martin Vantage, its curves seeming to beckon Eleanor Washington as she walked through the glass doors. Richard Sterling, the dealership's owner, stood behind the main counter, his attention fixed on a conversation with another salesperson. His booming laugh echoed through the space, bouncing off the polished surfaces. The dealership's other customers, mostly older white men in expensive suits with younger companions, moved about with the easy familiarity of those accustomed to luxury, nodding to Richard in recognition. Eleanor observed the scene with quiet amusement, recognizing the familiar social dynamics at play. At 62, she carried herself with the grace and confidence that came from decades of success in the financial world. Her tailored Oscar de la Renta dress and carefully styled silver hair spoke of refined taste, while her eyes held the sharp intelligence that had helped her build Washington Investment Group from the ground up. The click of her Salvatore Ferragamo heels against the marble floor drew curious glances, but Eleanor was used to being the only black person in spaces like this. After 30 years of breaking through glass ceilings in the financial industry, she had learned to wear others' assumptions like a loose garment, acknowledged but not embraced. "Excuse me," she said, running her hand along the Aston Martin's smooth exterior. "I'd like to know more about this model." Richard turned slowly, his ice-blue eyes sweeping over her appearance. Despite her elegant attire and sophisticated bearing, his lip curled slightly in that all-too-familiar way Eleanor had seen countless times before. Little did he know, this afternoon would become a turning point, not just for him, but for an entire industry that had too long turned a blind eye to its deep-seated prejudices. Richard's response dripped with condescension, each word carefully chosen to wound. "Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at our used car location across town. This particular vehicle is rather exclusive. The Vantage represents the pinnacle of British engineering and luxury." Eleanor's spine stiffened imperceptibly, though her voice remained steady, honed by years of dealing with men who underestimated her. "I'm quite familiar with Aston Martin's reputation," she replied professionally. "I'm particularly interested in the V8 engine's performance specifications and the available custom interior options." The dealership owner's laugh echoed through the showroom again. "Ma'am, this Aston Martin costs more than most people make in 5 years. I wouldn't want to waste your time." "You're wasting it right now," Eleanor replied, her voice carrying quietly but firmly across the showroom. "And you'll continue to waste it until you show me this car properly." Richard's amusement turned to irritation, his carefully maintained veneer of sophistication cracking to reveal something uglier beneath. He stepped closer, invading her personal space in a way meant to intimidate. "Look," he said, his voice hardening. "We have certain standards here at Prestige Motors. We cater to a certain clientele. I'm sure you understand." He gestured toward the door, this time more forcefully. "Perhaps you should leave before this becomes uncomfortable for everyone." Eleanor stood her ground, the rich fabric of her dress catching the afternoon light. Years of breaking through barriers had taught her when to bend and when to stand firm. "I'd like to speak to your supervisor," she said, knowing full well what his response would be. "I own this dealership," Richard declared proudly, his chest puffing out, "and I'm asking you to leave. Now." When Eleanor didn't move, Richard's face reddened, the flush creeping up from his collar to his hairline. "Security!" he called out, reaching for his phone. "And I'm calling the police. We don't need your kind causing trouble here." Minutes later, Eleanor found herself being handcuffed, the cold metal pressing against her wrists as two police officers responded to Richard's claims of disruption and potential fraud. Despite her calm attempts to explain the situation, she was being led toward the door. "Next time, know your place," Richard called after her, loud enough for everyone to hear. Eleanor held her head high as she was escorted out, even as other customers stared and whispered. The handcuffs bit into her skin, but she refused to show any sign of distress. As she was led to the police car, a slight smile played at the corners of her mouth. A smile that would have worried Richard Sterling immensely had he noticed it. What he didn't know about Eleanor Washington could fill volumes, and his ignorance was about to cost him dearly. 25 years ago, Eleanor Washington started her journey in a windowless basement office of Morton & Associates, a small accounting firm in downtown Boston. Fresh from her evening law classes at Suffolk University, she would often be the last one to leave, her desk lamp casting long shadows as she pored over financial statements and law textbooks. Her husband James's life insurance policy had given her just enough to secure a tiny apartment in Dorchester and pay for evening classes. With 2-year-old Michael sleeping in the next room, she would study until her eyes burned, fueled by coffee and an unwavering determination to create a better life for her son. "You're wasting your time," her supervisor had told her bluntly one day. "Women like you don't make it in finance." Eleanor had simply smiled, thinking of little Michael at home. "Watch me," she'd replied quietly, turning back to her work. Through relentless networking and exceptional financial instincts, she began building her own client base. Starting with small business owners in her community, she gradually expanded to professional athletes who appreciated her straightforward approach and fierce protection of their interests. When she landed her first million-dollar client, a retired Patriots player who'd heard about her from his teammates, Eleanor didn't celebrate with champagne. Instead, she used the commission to move to a better school district for Michael and started planning her own firm. Washington Investment Group began in a small office above a coffee shop in Back Bay. Today, it occupies 3 floors of a gleaming tower in Boston's financial district, managing billions in assets for clients who trust Eleanor's sharp mind and unwavering integrity. The kitchen of Eleanor's Beacon Hill penthouse always came alive on Sunday evenings. The aroma of her signature pot roast, made from her late husband James's recipe, would fill the air as Michael recounted his latest cases. These weekly dinners had been their tradition since Michael's law school days, a sacred time when mother and son could simply be themselves. "Pass the cornbread, Mom," Michael would say, his Harvard law degree and growing reputation as a fierce civil rights attorney momentarily set aside. At these moments, he was just her boy, the same one who used to fall asleep to the sound of her typing late into the night. "Remember when we could barely afford hamburger?" Eleanor chuckled, passing the basket. "Now look at us." Michael's smile matched his mother's. At 32, he had his father's height and build, but his expressions, that mixture of determination and gentle humor, were all Eleanor. "Those lean years taught me everything, Mum. Watching you turn nothing into something, that was my first lesson in justice." Their conversation flowed easily between childhood memories and current events. Eleanor would share stories about her latest investment strategies while Michael discussed his ongoing cases. But beneath the casual banter lay a deeper connection, a shared understanding of what it meant to navigate spaces not designed for people like them. "You know what I remember most?" Michael said, helping himself to more greens. "Those nights when you'd come home exhausted from work and classes, but you'd still find energy to help me with my homework. You'd say, 'Excellence is not an option, it's a necessity.'" They finished together laughing. Eleanor reached across the table, squeezing her son's hand. "Your father would be so proud of you, Michael. Using your success to help others, just like he always dreamed of doing." A comfortable silence fell between them as they gazed out at the Boston skyline through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The same city that had once seemed so daunting to a young widow and her small son now lay at their feet, transformed by their perseverance and dedication. "This view never gets old, does it?" Michael mused. "No," Eleanor replied softly. "But the best view isn't the city, son. It's seeing the man you've become." One particular evening stands out in Eleanor's memory. Michael had just won his first major discrimination case against a prominent Boston bank, and they were celebrating on her penthouse terrace. The autumn air was crisp, and the city lights twinkled below like earthbound stars. "You know, Mom," Michael said, leaning against the railing, "today in court, I kept hearing your voice in my head. All those lessons you taught me." Eleanor poured them both a glass of Cabernet, the same wine they'd splurged on when she'd landed her first major client. "Which lessons were those?" she asked, though she already knew. "Remember that day in the luxury department store? I was maybe 12. The security guard followed us around the whole time, and when I got angry, you pulled me aside and said—" "Your anger is justified," Eleanor finished, "but your response needs to be strategic." She smiled, remembering that moment clearly. "You were so upset." "I wanted to yell at him, but you showed me something better. You asked to speak to the manager, presented your platinum card, and bought more than anyone else that day. Then you wrote a letter to corporate about their training policies." Eleanor nodded, swirling her wine thoughtfully. "Because sometimes, son, the best revenge isn't showing your anger. It's showing your excellence. Let them underestimate you. Let them make their assumptions. Then use their prejudice as your ladder." Michael turned to face her, his expression serious. "That's what I did today in court. The opposing counsel tried to dismiss me as a young, inexperienced lawyer. By the time they realized their mistake—" "It was too late," Eleanor finished, pride evident in her voice. "Just like I taught you." She walked over to her bookshelf and pulled out an old leather journal. "Your father wrote something here just before he passed. He said, 'Teach our son that dignity isn't just about holding your head high. It's about lifting others up when you succeed.'" Michael took the journal carefully, running his fingers over his father's handwriting. "Is that why you always insisted I take pro bono cases, even when I was swamped with corporate work?" "Exactly," Eleanor replied. "Justice isn't just about winning cases, Michael. It's about changing systems. Sometimes that means working within them, understanding them, then using that knowledge to transform them from the inside out." She paused, looking out over the city. "You know, when people see me now, the successful CEO, the millionaire, they don't see the nights I cried after putting you to bed wondering if I could make it. But those struggles taught us both something precious." "What's that, Mum?" "That true power isn't in making others feel small. It's in the patience to wait for the right moment to show them exactly who you are." At 32, Michael Washington had already built a reputation that made powerful people nervous. His corner office at Morrison & Ellis overlooked the same financial district where his mother had started her career, but his focus wasn't on managing wealth. It was on managing justice. The Washington method, that's what other lawyers called his approach. Like a chess master, he would build his cases meticulously, combining corporate law expertise with civil rights advocacy in ways that left discriminatory businesses nowhere to hide. His most recent victory had made headlines across Massachusetts, a successful class action suit against a major banking chain that had been systematically denying loans to minority business owners. The case had seemed impossible until Michael uncovered a pattern hidden in thousands of loan applications. "Your Honor," he had said in his closing argument, his voice carrying his mother's quiet confidence, Discrimination doesn't always wear a name tag. Sometimes it hides in algorithms, in policies, in standard procedures that aren't standard at all. The jury's unanimous verdict had sent shockwaves through the financial industry, but it wasn't the $50 million settlement that made Michael proud. It was the mandatory policy changes that followed. In his office, photographs told the story of his journey. Michael at his Harvard Law graduation with Eleanor beaming beside him. Michael with his first pro bono client, an elderly black woman who'd been unfairly evicted. Michael receiving the Young Lawyer of the Year award from the Civil Rights Defense Coalition. But his most prized possession was a framed quote from his mother that hung behind his desk. Excellence is not an option, it's a necessity. His reputation had grown beyond just legal circles. CEOs and corporate boards had learned to fear the sight of Michael Washington entering their lobbies with his signature briefcase, a gift from Eleanor on his first day at Morrison & Ellis. "When they see you coming," she had said, handing him the Italian leather briefcase, "they should know that justice isn't far behind." That briefcase now sat on his desk as he reviewed his latest case files. His phone buzzed. A text from his mother. "Stopped by Prestige Motors today. We need to talk." Michael looked at the message, then at the stack of discrimination cases on his desk. A slight smile crossed his face, the same smile his mother had shown earlier that day in handcuffs. Richard Sterling was about to learn why the Washington name carried so much weight in Boston. 1 week after Eleanor's arrest, the morning sun cast long shadows through Prestige Motors' spotless windows. Richard Sterling sat in his office, reviewing the latest sales figures with satisfaction. The incident with "that difficult woman," as he described it to his staff, was already filed away in his mind as just another day of maintaining standards. The gleaming trophies on his wall, Luxury Dealer of the Year, Excellence in Customer Service, caught the morning light, reinforcing his sense of self-importance. He'd dealt with her kind before, people who didn't understand their place in the world of luxury automobiles. His intercom buzzed, interrupting his self-congratulatory reverie. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant's voice carried an unusual note of uncertainty. "There's a Mr. Washington here to see you. He says he has an appointment." Richard frowned, not remembering any appointment, but the name stirred something in his memory. "Send him in," he said, straightening his Italian silk tie. The man who walked through his door made Richard's mahogany desk seem small. Michael Washington stood 6 feet 2 inches in a bespoke Tom Ford suit that made Richard's look off the rack. His dark skin seemed to glow with health and confidence, and his smile was both professional and slightly predatory, reminiscent of a shark who had just spotted its prey. "Mr. Sterling," Michael said, his Harvard ring catching the light as he extended his hand. "I believe you met my mother last week, Eleanor Washington, the woman you had arrested for attempting to purchase an Aston Martin." The color drained from Richard's face as recognition dawned. His earlier smugness evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. The memory of his actions suddenly played back in vivid, uncomfortable detail. "I dot," Richard started, but Michael smoothly cut him off, placing his leather briefcase, the one his mother had given him, on the desk with deliberate precision. "Before you speak," Michael said, his voice carrying the weight of years of legal experience, "I should mention that I'm not here as a son. I'm here as a partner at Morrison & Ellis, and you, Mr. Sterling, have a very serious problem." "A problem?" Richard's voice cracked slightly as he reached for the papers Michael had placed on his desk. "Several, actually." Michael leaned back, adjusting his Cartier watch, another gift from his mother. "This is a notice of legal action against Prestige Motors for discrimination, false imprisonment and defamation. I'm also filing separate complaints with the Consumer Protection Bureau and the Civil Rights Commission." Michael opened his briefcase, pulling out more documents with methodical precision. My team has already gathered statements from witnesses present that day, including several of your regular customers who were, shall we say, disturbed by your behavior. Richard's mouth went dry as he scanned the documents, his eyes widening at the detailed allegations and the potential damages listed. Now see here, there must be some misunderstanding. Oh, I understand perfectly, Michael interrupted smoothly. I understand that you had my mother, Eleanor Washington, CEO of Washington Investment Group, handcuffed and arrested for trying to purchase a car from your dealership. I understand that you laughed while it happened. He paused, letting each word land with precision. And I understand that your actions violated at least 15 state and federal laws. He pulled out another folder. I also understand that this isn't the first time you've displayed such behavior. My firm has already been contacted by 3 other individuals with similar experiences at your dealership. Would you like to hear their stories? Richard's face had gone from pale to ashen. Washington Investment Group, he whispered, the name finally registering in his mind. Yes, Michael confirmed, a smile playing on his lips that matched his mother's from a week ago. The same Washington Investment Group that, as of this morning, owns a controlling interest in Luxury Motors International, your parent company. He paused to let that sink in. Mother always taught me to invest wisely. It's amazing what you can accomplish with the right strategy and patience. Richard collapsed into his leather chair, the reality of his situation finally dawning on him. The awards on his walls suddenly seemed to mock him, testimonies to a success built on prejudice and privilege that was about to come crashing down. You'll be hearing from the corporate board this afternoon, Michael continued, straightening his cuffs deliberately, but I wanted to deliver this news personally. Mother also taught me about the importance of looking people in the eye when delivering important messages. Let me explain exactly what's happening, Mr. Sterling, Michael said, removing his suit jacket and placing it carefully on the chair before sitting down. Over the past week, Washington Investment Group has been quietly acquiring shares of Luxury Motors International. When news of your incident with my mother hit the board's desk this morning, they were surprisingly receptive to our proposal for immediate management changes. He pulled out a sleek tablet, turning it to show Richard a real-time stock ticker. Right now, your parent company's board is in an emergency session. In about... He checked his watch. 20 minutes, they'll be announcing a complete overhaul of all North American operations, starting with this dealership. Richard's hands trembled as he reached for his water glass. You can't do this. I've built this business for 20 years. Actually, we can and we are, Michael interrupted smoothly. You see, what fascinated me most about reviewing your dealership's records was the pattern we uncovered. Did you know that in the past 5 years, you've turned away or reported to security over 40 qualified minority customers, each incident carefully documented as a potential security threat in your own system? He pulled another document from his briefcase. But here's what's truly interesting. Your finance department's internal metrics show that these same security threats had credit scores averaging in the high 700s, with verified annual incomes exceeding $300,000. That's quite a pattern of discriminatory practice, wouldn't you say? Richard slumped in his chair, his earlier arrogance completely deflated. I was just protecting our brand's reputation by rejecting qualified buyers based on their race. Michael's voice remained calm, but carried an edge of steel. That's not protecting a brand, Mr. Sterling. That's violating federal law, and now you're going to face the consequences of those choices. He stood up, buttoning his jacket with precise movements. By close of business today, you'll no longer be the owner of Prestige Motors. The board has already agreed to our terms. This dealership will become the flagship location for a new initiative in inclusive luxury car sales, complete with comprehensive anti-discrimination training and community outreach programs. A slight smile crossed Michael's face. the same smile his mother wore when she was led out in handcuffs. "Consider this poetic justice, Mr. Sterling. The very people you tried to exclude will now be running the show." Richard Sterling stared at his trembling hands, his world crumbling around him. The weight of what was happening finally sank in. He wasn't just losing his dealership, he was about to become a cautionary tale in the luxury car industry. "Your security deposit box at Boston Private," Michael said, sliding another document across the desk. "The one where you keep the real ledgers showing customer rejections. We'll need access to that as well." Richard's head snapped up, his face turning even paler. "How did you know about that?" Michael finished, his voice carrying a trace of his mother's quiet confidence. "You'd be surprised what people share when they realize they're on the wrong side of history. Your former finance manager was particularly helpful after we showed him the evidence of systematic discrimination." The intercom buzzed again. "Mr. Sterling," his assistant's voice wavered. "Channel 5 News is in the lobby. They're requesting a comment about the ownership change, and the corporate board is on line 1. Michael stood, adjusting his cufflinks, a graduation gift from his mother. That would be the press release going live. Historic change in luxury auto sales. Washington Investment Group leads industry revolution in inclusive business practices. Has a nice ring to it, doesn't it? He gathered his documents with methodical precision. "Oh, and one more thing, Mr. Sterling. Mother asked me to pass along a message." Michael paused at the door, his hand resting on the polished handle. "She's decided to purchase her Aston Martin from your competitor across town. They were much more accommodating." The slight smile that crossed Michael's face held generations of quiet triumph. "She bought 2, actually. One for herself and one for me. We'll be sure to drive past here occasionally, just to admire the view." The door closed behind him with a quiet click, leaving Richard Sterling alone with his regrets, his face as pale as the papers that would soon end his career. Through the window, he could see news vans pulling into the parking lot, their satellite dishes reaching toward the sky like accusing fingers. His own laughter from that day echoed in his memory, now sounding hollow and haunted, reminding him how quickly fortunes can change when justice finds its mark. 3 months later, the newly renamed Prestige Motors, a Washington automotive group company, sparkled under the spring sunshine. The showroom's transformation went far beyond its elegant new signage and modern decor. The real change was evident in the diverse group of sales professionals who now moved confidently through the space and in the varied clientele they served. Sarah Chen, the new general manager, personally selected by Eleanor Washington, stood where Richard Sterling once held court. A former luxury automotive executive with 20 years of experience, she had left her previous position after witnessing similar discriminatory practices. Now, she was part of the solution. "Our goal," Sarah explained to a group of new employees during their orientation, "is to redefine luxury car sales. Excellence isn't just about the vehicles we sell, it's about how we treat every person who walks through those doors." The changes were both subtle and profound. The security desk had been replaced with a welcome center, staffed by a team that reflected Boston's diverse community. The showroom now featured multimedia displays highlighting successful professionals from all backgrounds. A new community outreach program offered automotive career workshops for minority youth. The finance department had been completely restructured, with transparent lending practices and anti-discrimination protocols. But perhaps the most significant change was the new apprenticeship program, offering paid training opportunities to promising students from underserved communities. It was Eleanor's idea, turning a place that once excluded people into one that actively lifted them up. "Remember," Sarah told her team during their morning meeting, "we're not just selling cars. We're proving that success and inclusivity go hand in hand. Every customer who walks through those doors deserves to feel like they belong here." The results spoke for themselves. In just 3 months, sales had increased by 30%, with customer satisfaction scores reaching record highs. The dealership had become a model for the industry, featured in business magazines and industry publications as an example of how diversity and profit could work together. Eleanor's vision had transformed more than just a dealership. It had created a template for change that was already rippling through the luxury automotive industry. In the penthouse conference room of Washington Investment Group, Eleanor and Michael sat at the head of a long mahogany table surrounded by community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and industry executives. The view of Boston's skyline provided a dramatic backdrop as they launched the Washington Justice Initiative, a foundation dedicated to combating discrimination in luxury retail and services. What happened at Prestige Motors wasn't an isolated incident, Eleanor began, her voice carrying the weight of experience. It was a symptom of a larger problem. Today, we're not just talking about change, we're funding it. The Foundation's initial program included a $10 million legal fund to support discrimination cases in luxury retail, educational programs for high-end businesses about inclusive practices, research grants to study and expose discriminatory patterns in luxury markets, mentorship programs connecting successful minority executives with emerging professionals. "But this isn't just about writing checks," Michael added, standing beside his mother. "It's about creating sustainable change. Every business that partners with us commits to concrete actions and measurable results." Jennifer Martinez, a former retail executive turned civil rights advocate, presented the Foundation's first-year goals. "We've already identified 20 luxury businesses across the country willing to undergo complete anti-discrimination audits. They'll serve as pilot programs for our transformation model." Eleanor watched the proceedings with quiet satisfaction. The Foundation would ensure that what happened to her would create lasting positive change. She thought about all the others who had faced similar treatment but lacked the resources to fight back. "This foundation," she addressed the room, "isn't about revenge. It's about redemption, about showing that excellence and equality aren't mutually exclusive. They're mutually essential." As the meeting concluded, applications were already pouring in from businesses wanting to participate in the initiative's programs. The Washington name, once dismissed by Richard Sterling, was now becoming synonymous with progressive change in luxury retail. On a quiet Sunday morning, 6 months after losing his dealership, Richard Sterling sat in a modest office within the Washington Justice Initiative's headquarters. The corner office and imported furniture were gone, replaced by practical furnishings and walls covered with diversity training certificates. "The hardest part," Richard said to the small group seated before him, "was admitting that my success had been built on prejudice. I didn't see it then, or maybe I didn't want to see it." After the takeover, Richard had hit rock bottom. His reputation was ruined, his industry contacts abandoned him, and his own children expressed shame at his actions. Then, unexpectedly, he received a letter from Eleanor Washington. "She offered me a choice," he explained, his voice humbled. "I could fight the lawsuits and lose everything, or I could join the Foundation's rehabilitation program and help change the industry from within." Now, Richard served as a cautionary voice in the Foundation's training programs, sharing his story with other luxury retail executives. "I used to think I was protecting a brand," he continued, adjusting his much simpler tie. "In reality, I was just protecting my own prejudices. It took losing everything to understand that true luxury isn't about exclusion. It's about excellence in how we treat every human being." His role at the Foundation was part of his journey toward redemption. He worked alongside many of the same people he once would have turned away, learning from their experiences and perspectives. "The irony," he said with a sad smile, "is that my business would have been more successful if I had been more inclusive. The customers I rejected out of prejudice are now some of Prestige's most valued clients." Eleanor had visited him once during his training. "Redemption," she told him, "starts with acknowledging our mistakes and working to correct them. The question isn't who you were, Mr. Sterling. It's who you choose to become." On a bright autumn afternoon, Eleanor Washington pulled her metallic silver Aston Martin into the newly renovated Prestige Motors parking lot, with Michael following in his matching vehicle. The symmetry of the moment wasn't lost on either of them. Mother and son in identical luxury cars, returning to the place that had once tried to exclude them. Inside, the showroom buzzed with diverse activity. A young black saleswoman was explaining the features of a new Mercedes to an elderly white couple. A hijab-wearing finance manager was finalizing paperwork with a Latino business owner. This was the new face of luxury automotive sales. Sarah Chen greeted them warmly. "Mrs. Washington, Michael, you're just in time for our quarterly community day." In the showroom's event space, local high school students from underserved communities were attending a workshop on careers in the automotive industry. Richard Sterling stood among them, not as the former owner, but as a speaker sharing hard-learned lessons about bias and change. "Sometimes," he was saying to the students, "our greatest mistakes can lead to the most important transformations." Eleanor and Michael stood at the back of the room, observing. "You know, Mom," Michael whispered, "when you first suggested giving him a second chance, I thought you were being too generous." Eleanor smiled, watching Richard answer questions from eager young students. "Revenge may feel good for a moment, son, but true change happens when we transform our opponents into allies." The dealership that had once been a symbol of exclusion had become a beacon of possibility. Monthly sales had doubled, but more importantly, it had become a model for other luxury businesses nationwide. As they left the showroom, Eleanor paused by her Aston Martin. A young black girl was admiring the car, her face pressed against the window. Eleanor smiled, remembering another time, another window. "Would you like to sit inside?" she asked the girl, whose eyes widened with surprise and delight. As the child settled into the driver's seat, her mother watching proudly, Eleanor caught Michael's knowing smile. This was why they had fought, not just to right a wrong, but to ensure that the next generation would find open doors where they had once found barriers. The sun was setting over Boston as they drove away, their matching Aston Martins gleaming in the golden light. In the rearview mirror, Eleanor could see the Washington Automotive Group logo shining brightly, a testament to how far they'd come and a promise of how far they could still go. 1 year after the Prestige Motors incident, Eleanor Washington stood at a podium in the Boston Convention Center, addressing the National Luxury Retailers Association's annual conference. The audience, once predominantly white and male, now reflected a diverse cross-section of America's business leadership. What happened at Prestige Motors wasn't just about one dealership or one incident of discrimination, Eleanor began. It became a catalyst for change across the luxury retail industry. The numbers told the story. Over 50 luxury dealerships nationwide had adopted the Washington model of inclusive sales. Minority customer satisfaction in luxury retail had increased by 60%. Sales to diverse communities had grown by 45% industry-wide. The Washington Justice Initiative had successfully handled 200 discrimination cases, but the real impact went beyond statistics. In communities across the country, stories emerged of barriers breaking down, of opportunities opening up, of dignity restored. "When we share our stories," Eleanor concluded, "we don't just change minds, we transform industries." The transformation of the luxury automotive industry was profound. Trade magazines that once featured only certain types of success stories now regularly highlighted diverse achievements. From excluded to empowered, how diversity drove luxury sales to record highs. The new face of luxury, how inclusion became the ultimate status symbol. Washington effect, how one family revolutionized luxury retail. Major manufacturers had taken notice. BMW, Mercedes, and Aston Martin had all launched diversity initiatives modeled after the Washington program. Dealerships across the country were competing not just on sales figures, but on inclusion metrics. Michael, speaking at an industry roundtable, put it simply: luxury was never about exclusion. True luxury is about excellence in our products, our service, and most importantly, in how we treat every human being who walks through our doors. Back in her Beacon Hill penthouse, Eleanor sat with Michael on the terrace where they'd had so many Sunday dinners. The city lights twinkled below, and 2 Aston Martins gleamed in the private garage. "You know what your father used to say?" Eleanor asked, sipping her wine. "He said success isn't just about climbing the ladder, it's about sending the elevator back down." Michael nodded, thinking of all the lives they'd touched over the past year. "We did more than that, Mum. We rebuilt the whole building." "Because we understood something powerful," Eleanor smiled. "Dignity isn't just about standing tall when they try to push you down. It's about having the patience to wait, the wisdom to plan, and the strength to transform anger into action." Their story had become more than just a tale of revenge or justice. It had become a testament to the power of strategic patience, of dignity maintained in the face of discrimination, and of the profound change possible when opportunity meets preparation. "The greatest victory," Eleanor said, raising her glass to the city lights, "isn't in proving them wrong. It's in showing others what's possible." And across Boston, across America, doors were opening, minds were changing, and a new generation was learning that true luxury wasn't about keeping people out, but about lifting people up. Thank you for taking time to witness this story with us. If this story touched your heart, share your thoughts in the comments. Every story we share is meant to move and transform. If you found inspiration in today's tale, simply leave a 9 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity. Until our next story unfolds.